The rain in Oakland never washed anything clean. It only made the streets slicker, darker, harder to trust. It pooled in the cracks of the asphalt and caught the reflections of neon signs that had no business still being lit at 2 in the morning. The city smelled like wet concrete and diesel exhaust, and the kind of rot that comes from things left too long in the dark. Ren Calloway sat in the driver's seat of a 1998 Ford Taurus with a busted heater and a windshield so fogged she could barely see the building across the street. She was 19 years old. She had $3 folded into the back pocket of jeans she had been wearing for 4 days straight. And she had not eaten since yesterday morning when she split a gas station hot dog with a stray cat behind a dumpster on East 14th Street. The car smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap vanilla air freshener. That smell was baked into the upholstery so deep that no amount of open windows or cold rain could pull it out. It was the smell of her mother. It was the smell of a woman named Jolene who had emptied their joint bank account 17 days ago, packed a single duffel bag, kissed Ren on the forehead while she slept, and disappeared into the California night like smoke through a screen door. 17 days. That was how long Ren had been living in this car. That was how long it had been since she woke up to an eviction notice taped to the apartment door and a bank balance of zero. Jolene had taken everything: the money, the identification documents, the phone charger. She left behind a half-empty bottle of vanilla perfume and a daughter who had spent her entire life learning how to survive women who could not stay. Ren wiped the condensation from the windshield with the sleeve of her oversized gray sweatshirt. Through the streaked glass, she stared at the building across the street. Ironclad Customs. The name was painted in faded white block letters across a corrugated steel facade that stretched half a city block. It was a fortress: cinder block walls, heavy steel roll-up doors, a row of immaculate custom-built Harley-Davidsons parked outside like chrome sentinels, standing guard in the downpour. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what Ironclad Customs really was. It was the front operation for the local Hells Angels charter. Cops drove past it without slowing down. Civilians crossed the street to avoid walking too close. Mothers pulled their children a little tighter when the thunder of unmuffled engines rolled through the block on Sunday mornings. Ren was not a civilian anymore. She was not a student. She was not a daughter. She was a hungry, abandoned ghost sitting in a dead car with $3 and no address. The bikers were not a threat. They were her last option on Earth. She knew engines. That was the one thing Jolene had accidentally given her. Growing up, they never had money for a real mechanic. Every time one of Jolene's parade of dying vehicles broke down on the side of some forgotten highway, it was Ren who crawled underneath with a flashlight and a socket wrench. She taught herself how to bleed brake lines at 13. She rebuilt a carburetor at 15 using parts she pulled from a junkyard outside Stockton. She kept a 1991 Honda Civic running for 2 years on nothing but willpower and electrical tape. She could fix things. It was the only marketable skill she had. The diners were not hiring. The retail stores wanted a permanent address she no longer possessed. But a garage might not ask questions. Ren pulled the hood of her sweatshirt over her head, opened the car door, and stepped out into the biting Oakland rain. The moment she pushed through the heavy side door of Ironclad Customs, the sound hit her like a wall. A revving engine somewhere deep in the shop sent vibrations through the concrete floor and up through her ribs. The air was thick with the smell of high-octane fuel burning rubber and the sharp mineral tang of fresh grease. Classic rock blared from a boombox wedged onto a towering red tool chest in the corner. The space was cavernous. 3 full-service bays stretched out under fluorescent lights that buzzed and flickered. Hydraulic lifts held bikes in various stages of surgery, and moving between them like bears in a cave were men the size of refrigerators. They were covered in faded ink and dressed in grease-stained denim and leather. Through an open doorway at the back of the shop, Ren caught a glimpse of leather cuts hanging on a rack. The infamous winged death head, the unmistakable insignia of the Hells Angels. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Shop is closed to walk-ins. The voice came from her left, hard, flat, the kind of voice that was used to being obeyed without repetition. Ren turned. A man stood by the nearest workbench, wiping his hands on a filthy red rag. He was in his late 40s, built like a man who had spent decades turning wrenches and throwing punches in equal measure. He had a thick salt and pepper beard, cold blue eyes that seemed to process everything in the room simultaneously, and scars crisscrossing both forearms like a roadmap of old violence. A patch on his leather vest read Hatchet. "I am not a customer," Wren said. Her voice cracked. She heard it. She hated it. But she forced her chin up and held his gaze because she had learned a long time ago that looking away from dangerous men only made them more dangerous. "I am looking for work. I heard you need a shop hand." Hatchet stopped wiping his hands. He stared at her. The stare was not casual. It was an inventory. It cataloged her height, her weight, the dark circles under her eyes, the way her sweatshirt hung off her frame, like she had lost 15 pounds she could not afford to lose. It stripped away every layer of bravado she had built up on the walk across the street and left behind the terrified, starving teenager underneath. Several other mechanics stopped what they were doing. The silence that fell over the front bay was sudden and total. Even the boombox seemed to lower its volume out of respect for whatever was about to happen. "You heard wrong, little girl," Hatchet said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. "This is not a place for kids. Go back to school." "I am 19, Wren said, stepping further into the light. "And I do not need a babysitter. I need a wrench and a paycheck. I can sweep floors, organize tools, and I know my way around a V-twin engine block better than most guys twice my age." A younger biker leaned against a tool cart across the room. He was in his early 20s, lean and wiry, with tattoos climbing up both sides of his neck, and a smirk that suggested he found most things in life either amusing or beneath him. He let out a short, harsh laugh. "She has got grit, Hatchet, or she is just stupid." Hatchet did not smile. He pointed a grease-stained finger at a disassembled carburetor sitting on a stainless steel workbench near the wall. The parts were spread out in a rough semicircle, and even from 10 feet away, Wren could see that whoever had worked on it last had made a mess. "That is off in 84, shovelhead," Hatchet said. "The kid who got fired yesterday could not get the float adjusted right. It is flooding. You have 10 minutes to tell me what he did wrong. If you cannot, you walk out that door and you never come down this street again." Wren did not hesitate. She walked to the bench. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes in that garage tracking her movement. These were men who had spent their lives reading people the way wolves read the tree line. They were watching for weakness, for hesitation, for any sign that she did not belong. She blocked them out. She focused on the metal. Her fingers were shaking slightly, but her hands moved with the kind of muscle memory that only comes from years of practice under pressure. She picked up the float assembly, turned it in the light, examined the pin. She checked the needle valve, ran her fingertip along the threading of the seat. She did not need 10 minutes. She did not need 5. Within 3 minutes, she held up a tiny bent piece of brass between her thumb and forefinger. He forced the pin. Wren said, her voice steady now because she was speaking the only language she had ever been fluent in. "Bent it out of alignment so the needle is not seating properly. It is dumping fuel straight into the bowl. You need a new pin and the seat needs to be cleaned." He left grit in the threading. The young biker with the neck tattoos let out a low whistle. Hatchet walked over. He took the bent pin from her hand and held it up to the fluorescent light, rotating it slowly between his thick fingers. Then he looked at her. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind those cold blue eyes. Something that might have been recognition. "What is your name, kid?" "Wren. Wren Calloway." The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Wren saw it. The muscle in Hatchet's jaw ticked. His eyes narrowed for half a second, then reset. He looked at her the way a man looks at a photograph he thought he had lost. "Minimum wage," Hatchet said, turning his back. "Off the books. You sweep, you scrub, you fetch parts, and you keep your mouth shut about anything you see or hear in this building. Understand?" "Yes, sir." "Do not call me sir. Starts at 6 tomorrow morning. Do not be late, Calloway." The first 2 weeks at Ironclad Customs were a masterclass in exhaustion and silent education. Wren's hands were permanently stained black. Her back ached from scrubbing concrete floors with industrial degreaser. Her ears rang constantly from the roar of air compressors and unbaffled exhaust pipes being tested at full throttle. She went to sleep tired in ways she did not know a body could be tired, and she woke up at 5:15 every morning already dreading the cold walk to the shop. But for the first time in her life, she had a purpose. She had a place to stand. The garage was a complex ecosystem with its own unwritten laws, and Wren learned her place at the bottom of the food chain quickly. She was the lowest rung. She fetched tools, cleaned parts, organized inventory, and kept her head down. The men around her were rough, crude, and deeply intimidating. They spoke in a language of grunts and shorthand and casual profanity that would have made a sailor uncomfortable. But beneath the surface, there was a code, a structure, a strange, fierce loyalty that held the whole operation together like bolts holding an engine block. The warnings came from outside. When Wren walked to the corner bodega in the evenings to buy her meager dinner of instant ramen, the older woman behind the counter leaned across the scratched plexiglass and whispered, "You should not be working with those men, sweetheart. They are dangerous. The angels do not play by the rules the rest of us do. One wrong step, and they will make you disappear." Wren had nodded, clutching her plastic bag. But she thought about the alternative. Society had not offered her a job when she was starving. Society had locked her out of her apartment and handed her an eviction notice. Society saw a 19-year-old girl with no address and no family and looked the other way. The bikers had handed her a wrench. Inside the garage, two men became the pillars of her new existence. The first was the young biker who had laughed on her first day. His name was Boone. He was 23, a prospect trying to earn his full patch with the club. Prospects occupied a strange middle ground. They were not yet full members, which meant they handled the worst jobs, the longest hours, and the most relentless hazing from the patched brothers above them. Boone channeled his own frustrations downward onto Wren. He hid her tools. He assigned her the filthiest jobs. He sent her on wild goose chases for parts that did not exist. Wren endured it for 8 days. On the ninth, she packed his heavy work boots with axle grease while he was in the bathroom. Every step he took for the rest of the afternoon made a thick, squelching sound that echoed through the shop. Boone had not gotten angry. He had thrown his head back and laughed so hard the men in the next bay looked up from their work. He walked over to Wren, his greased boots leaving dark prints on the concrete, and clapped her on the shoulder so hard she stumbled sideways. "All right, Calloway. All right." From that day forward, the hazing stopped. It was replaced by something that was not quite friendship, but lived in the same neighborhood. He started explaining things. How the club hierarchy worked, which brothers to avoid before noon, which tools belonged to which mechanic and should never under any circumstances be borrowed without permission. The second pillar was a man called Ox. Ox was a force of nature in human form. He stood 6 feet 6 inches tall and weighed somewhere north of 300 pounds. His beard reached the middle of his chest. His hands were the size of dinner plates. He was the master mechanic, a man who could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone, who spoke to motorcycles with a tenderness and patience he never extended to human beings. Rumors followed Ox like exhaust fumes. He had served time in San Quentin. He had put a rival gang member through a plate glass window. He had once lifted the rear end of a pickup truck off a man's leg with his bare hands. Wren did not know which rumors were true. She did not ask. What she knew was that Ox noticed things. He noticed that she drank water from the shop tap instead of buying lunch. He noticed that her sweatshirt was the same one she wore every day. He noticed that she was getting thinner. One rainy Tuesday morning, Wren was struggling to loosen a rusted bolt on a suspension swing arm. She had not eaten since the previous afternoon. Her arms felt hollow. Her vision kept going soft around the edges. She leaned into the breaker bar with everything she had, and the bolt did not move. Suddenly, a massive shadow fell over her. A grease-covered hand the size of a catcher's mitt appeared in her peripheral vision, holding a steaming foil-wrapped breakfast burrito. "Eat," Ox grumbled. His voice sounded like a landslide happening in slow motion. "You are getting too skinny, making the shop look bad." Wren took the burrito. The warmth of it seeped through the foil and into her frozen fingers. She felt the heat travel up through her hands and into her chest, and for a moment she could not speak, because her throat had closed around something that was not food. "Thank you, Ox. Do not thank me. Just do not pass out on my floor." He turned back to his welding without another word. It was a small gesture, a burrito from the food truck down the street. It cost maybe $4. But to a girl who had spent 19 years scavenging for scraps of affection the way other people scavenged for spare change, it was the largest act of kindness anyone had ever shown her. The bikers did not ask about her past. They did not pry. They demanded hard work and loyalty, and in return they provided something Wren had never experienced before. A structure, a rhythm, A place where the rules, however brutal, at least made sense. But the nights were the problem. As November crept into Oakland, the temperature dropped. The days were cold. The nights were vicious. After the shop closed and the men disappeared into the back for their meetings, Wren would slip out the side door and walk 3 blocks to the abandoned lot behind a condemned warehouse where she kept her Taurus. She would climb into the back seat, pull a pile of cheap blankets over herself, and curl into a ball so tight her knees touched her chin. She never fully slept. The cold would not let her. It came through the windows and the gaps in the door seals and the rusted holes in the floorboard. It wrapped around her bones and squeezed. She would lie there shivering, watching her breath form small white clouds in the dark, and she would think about Jolene. She would think about the way her mother used to hum while she cooked, the way Jolene could make a full meal out of nothing but canned beans and hot sauce and sheer determination. The way she always smelled like vanilla perfume, even when they could not afford soap. Then she would think about the empty bank account, the eviction notice, the silence of the apartment on the morning she woke up alone. And the warmth of the memories would curdle into something cold and hard, and Wren would press her face into the blanket and breathe through it the way she breathed through everything. One morning she returned to the car after her shift and found something that stopped her in her tracks. On the back seat, folded neatly on top of her pile of thin blankets, was a heavy wool blanket, military grade, the kind that could stop the cold dead. Next to it sat a brown paper bag containing a sandwich, a bottle of water, and 2 granola bars. There was no note, no explanation. Wren stood in the rain staring at the blanket and the food, and she felt something crack open in her chest that she did not have a name for. She looked around the empty lot. There was no one, just the rain and the broken concrete and the rusted skeleton of the warehouse. She did not know who had left it. She did not ask. She was afraid that asking would make it stop. It happened again 2 days later. This time a pair of heavy wool socks tucked inside the paper bag alongside a thermos of hot coffee. The thermos was dented and old, the kind a man might keep in the cab of a truck for 20 years without thinking about it. On the third morning, she found a small portable heater plugged into a heavy-duty extension cord that ran from behind the warehouse to a junction box she had not noticed before. Someone had rigged it in the night. Someone who knew about electrical systems and cared enough to do the work quietly and without asking for credit. Wren plugged the heater in and sat in the back seat of the Taurus, feeling the warmth slowly fill the small space. She pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders and ate the sandwich and drank the coffee, and she cried. Not out of sadness, out of something much more dangerous, out of the first faint, terrifying stirring of hope. She never saw who did it, but 3 days later, after the shop had closed for the evening, and Wren was alone in the front bay finishing an inventory count, the heavy thud of boots echoed behind her. She turned. Hatchet stood in the doorway of his office, a clipboard in one hand and a ceramic mug of black coffee in the other. "You are still here, Calloway," he said. His voice carried no accusation, just observation, just finishing up. Wanted to make sure the inventory matched for the morning. Hatchet walked closer. He set the clipboard down on the counter and looked at her. His blue eyes were doing that thing they did, the thing that made her feel like he was reading a file on her that she did not know existed. "There is a studio apartment above the back bays," Hatchet said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy brass key. He set it down on the metal counter between them. The key made a sharp, clean sound against the steel. "It has heat. It has a lock on the door. It has a shower. Rent comes out of your paycheck. Move in tonight." He turned and walked away before she could speak. Wren stared at the key. She picked it up. It was warm from being in his pocket. She closed her fingers around it so tightly the teeth of the key pressed small marks into her palm. She moved in that night. The apartment was small, a single room with a bed, a small table, a hot plate, and a bathroom with a shower that took 4 minutes to run warm. The walls were bare cinder block. The floor was cold concrete covered with a thin industrial carpet that had seen better decades. It was the most beautiful room Wren had ever seen. She tested the lock on the door 7 times before she believed it worked. She stood under the hot shower until the water ran cold, washing 17 days of parking lots in fear off her skin. She lay down on the bed, pulled the wool blanket around herself, and listened to the distant hum of the garage below her feet. The vibration moved through the mattress and into her spine, and it sounded like the heartbeat of something enormous and alive. She slept, fully, deeply. For the first time in 17 days, she slept without shivering, without listening for footsteps, without curling into a ball to conserve heat. In the morning, she woke up and went to work. During her third week at Ironclad, Wren noticed something in Hatchett's office that she could not stop thinking about. She had gone in to drop off a parts receipt and found the room empty. The office was cluttered in the way that only a man who has been running the same operation for decades can achieve. Stacks of invoices, old motorcycle magazines, coffee mugs in various stages of fossilization. But on the corner of the scarred wooden desk, half hidden behind a pile of catalogs, was a photograph in a small silver frame. The frame was turned face down. Wren knew she should not look. Every rule of the garage said, mind your own business. Keep your eyes on your work. Do not ask questions you are not prepared to hear the answers to. But her hand moved before her brain could stop it. She reached out and tilted the frame up just enough to see the image. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, dark hair pulled into messy pigtails, a gap-toothed smile so wide it seemed to take up her entire face. She was sitting on a motorcycle that was far too big for her, her small hands gripping the handlebars, her feet dangling 3 feet above the pegs. Behind her, steadying the bike, was a younger version of Hatchett. His beard was darker, his eyes were softer. He was smiling in a way that Wren had never seen him smile. A heavy creak from the hallway made Wren drop the frame back to its face-down position. She grabbed the parts receipt, placed it on the desk, and left the office with her pulse hammering. She did not ask about the photograph. She did not mention it to anyone, but she could not stop seeing it. The gap-toothed smile, the younger man behind the bike with the softer eyes. 2 days later, she was in the back bay with Ox helping him remove a primary drive chain from a vintage panhead. The work was slow and required patience, and in those long stretches of quiet concentration, Ox sometimes spoke. That afternoon, while Wren held a tension plate in position and Ox worked a stubborn bolt free with a breaker bar, she said something she had promised herself she would not say. Ox, the photograph on Hatchett's desk, the one that is always turned down. Ox's massive hands stopped moving. He did not look at her. He stared at the bolt as if it had personally offended him. The silence stretched for 5 full seconds. Her name was Ruthie, Ox said. His voice was even lower than usual, stripped down to its foundations. She was 7 years old, 12 years ago. Car accident. Hatchett was driving. Wren felt the air leave her lungs. Ox went back to working the bolt. His hands were steady, but the muscles in his forearms were tight. That is all I am going to say about it, Yelloway. And if you are smart, that is all you will ever ask. Some doors in this place stay closed for a reason, not because the men behind them do not care, because they cared too much, and it broke something that does not heal. Wren nodded. She did not say another word for the rest of the afternoon. But that night, lying in her small apartment above the garage, she thought about Hatchett giving her the key to this room. She thought about the way he watched her from across the shop when he thought she was not looking. She thought about the wool blanket and the sandwiches and the portable heater rigged in the night. And she understood something that changed the way she saw everything. Hatchett was not just giving a homeless girl a place to sleep. He was trying to keep someone safe. Because 12 years ago, he had failed to keep someone safe, and the weight of that failure had turned a man with soft eyes into a man with eyes like blue ice. She was not his redemption. She knew that. People are not redemption. But she might have been his second chance to stand watch. And she decided, lying there in the dark, listening to the hum of the garage, that she would let him. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Wren woke at 5:15. She showered, dressed in her work clothes, and descended the metal staircase to the shop floor. She worked until 6 in the evening, sometimes later. She learned the names of the engines and the names of the men, and the difference between the ones who were dangerous and the ones who were merely frightening. Ox taught her how to read a torque specification by feel. Boone taught her how to check chain tension without a gauge. Hatchett said very little, but his silence had its own vocabulary. A nod meant good work. A grunt meant try again. A long stare followed by a slow exhale meant she had done something that reminded him of someone, and he needed a moment before he could speak. She had almost settled, almost let herself believe that this strange, rough, grease-stained world might be permanent. Then Taggart walked through the door. It was a Friday afternoon the week before Thanksgiving. The garage was buzzing with activity. A local charity toy run was happening the next day, and dozens of bikes were being prepped. Chrome was being polished. Exhausts were being tuned. The air smelled like brasso and anticipation. Wren was at the front counter, tallying a parts invoice when the glass door chimed. She did not look up immediately. "Be right with you," she called out. "Well now, ain't this a cozy little setup?" The voice hit Wren like a fist to the sternum. The pen dropped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. She looked up and the blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. Standing in the doorway was Taggart, her mother's ex-boyfriend, the man who used to drink away their rent money and who used his fists on the nights Jolene was not home. He was 6 feet tall with the kind of lean, strung-out frame that comes from years of choosing chemicals over food. His clothes were dirty. His eyes were sunken and manic. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. "Took me a long time finding your kid," Taggart said, stepping into the shop. He looked around at the expensive bikes and the rough-looking men in the bays, but he seemed oblivious to the danger of his surroundings. The drugs had eaten away whatever survival instincts he once possessed. "Your mother owes me $5,000. She skipped town, which means you are holding her debts. I want my money. I want my chum." "I do not have your money," Wren said. Her voice was trembling. She hated it. She gripped the edge of the counter to stop her hands from shaking. "She left me too. I have not seen her in months." "You need to leave now. Do not lie to me," Taggart shouted. He lunged forward and slammed both palms on the counter so hard the pencil cup rattled. "I know she left you a stash somewhere. Give it up, or I swear to God I will drag you out of here by your hair." He reached across the counter. His fingers grabbed the collar of Wren's work shirt. She cried out and tried to pull away, but his grip was tight and frantic and fueled by whatever he had put into his bloodstream that morning. Then the world changed. The deafening noise of the garage died, and all at once. The air compressors shut down. The impact wrenches went silent. The boombox was killed mid-song. The sudden absence of sound was more terrifying than any explosion. The only thing left was the heavy rhythmic thud of steel-toed boots on concrete. Coming closer, getting louder. Taggart froze. His fingers were still wrapped in Wren's collar, but his head turned slowly toward the sound. The color left his face. 5 men had materialized from the bays. They stood in a loose semicircle behind him, blocking the exit. Ox was at the center, holding a 3-foot breaker bar across his body like a man holding a baseball bat at the plate. His face showed nothing. No anger, no amusement, just the flat, patient expression of a man who was entirely comfortable with what was about to happen. Boone was to his left, sliding a heavy torque wrench from one hand to the other with a slow, rhythmic motion. He was smiling, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a young wolf watching a rabbit step into a clearing. They did not look like mechanics anymore. They looked like exactly what the world was terrified of. "You have about 3 seconds to take your hands off the girl." Hatchett's voice came from the doorway of his office. He walked slowly toward the counter, his thumbs hooked casually in the pockets of his leather cut. Every step was deliberate. Every movement was designed to communicate a single absolute message. "You are in my house." Taggart released Wren's collar and stumbled backward. His bravado evaporated. Whatever chemical courage had brought him through that door was no match for the wall of leather and muscle and controlled violence that now surrounded him. "Hey man, this is a family matter," Taggart stammered, his voice climbing an octave. "It has got nothing to do with you people." Hatchett stopped 2 feet from Taggart. He was not the tallest man in the room, but his presence seemed to fill the space around him like a gravitational field. "You came into my garage. You put your hands on my employee. That makes it my business. She owes me, her mother." "I do not care if the Almighty himself owes you money," Hatchett said, and his voice dropped to a register so low it was almost subsonic. "You look at her again. You breathe in her direction. And they will be finding pieces of you in the San Francisco Bay for the next 6 months. Do you understand me?" Taggart's eyes darted to Ox, who tapped the breaker bar lightly against his own palm. The sound was soft. The implication was not. Taggart nodded frantically. "Get out," Hatchett said. Taggart ran. He nearly fell over a pneumatic hose on his way to the door, caught himself on a tool cart, and scrambled into the gray afternoon light. The glass door slammed shut behind him, rattling in its frame. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room snapped like a cut cable. Wren's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, behind the counter, her back against the cabinets, her face buried in her grease-stained hands. A violent sob tore from her throat before she could stop it. It was the sound of 17 days of survival, finally finding a crack in the wall she had built around herself. She expected them to tell her to toughen up. She expected mockery. She expected the cold indifference that the world had taught her to expect from men. Instead, Ox walked behind the counter. The giant man lowered himself down to one knee beside her, and he placed his massive hand on top of her head. The weight of it was enormous and impossibly gentle. "He is gone, kid. He is not coming back." Wren pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed. In and out, in and out. She counted to 10. Then she dropped her hands, wiped her face on her sleeve, and stood it up. Her eyes were red. Her hands were still shaking. But she walked back to the counter, picked up the pen she had dropped, and went back to the parts invoice she had been working on when the door chimed. Hatchet watched her from across the room. He did not say a word, but he nodded. Once. Slowly. And in that nod was something that went far beyond professional approval. It was the acknowledgement of one survivor recognizing another. That evening, after the shop was locked and the men had filed into the back room for their weekly meeting, Hatchet asked Wren to stay. "Come into my office, Calloway." She followed him down the narrow hallway and into the cluttered room with the scarred desk and the face-down photograph and the faint smell of bourbon and gun oil. Hatchet closed the door behind them. He pointed to the worn leather chair across from his desk. Wren sat. Hatchet paced for a moment. He ran a hand over his beard. He picked up his coffee mug, looked into it, set it back down. Then he stopped and looked at her. "I knew who you were the day you walked into this shop," Hatchet said. The words hit Wren like ice water poured down her spine. "What?" "Your mother, Jolene. 20 years ago, her name was Jolene Albright. She did not just live in this neighborhood, Wren. She was an old lady. She rode with the club." Wren stared at him. The room felt like it was tilting. "My mother was with the Hells Angels. She was with a brother of ours," Hatchet said. He leaned against the edge of his desk, his arms crossed. "A man named Raith Calloway, your father." The word father landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Wren had spent her entire life without that word. Jolene had never spoken it. There were no photographs, no letters, no stories told at bedtime about a man who loved them and had to leave. There was only absence shaped like a man she had never seen. "Raith was a hard man," Hatchet continued. "Good in a fight, bad at being a father. When things got heavy with the law and the feds started closing in, Raith got sent up to federal lockup. Jolene ran. You dropped your last name back to his to hide in plain sight, and disappeared. The club spent years looking for her, looking for you, making sure you were safe." Wren's breath caught in her chest. "He died in prison," Hatchet said. His voice softened for the first time since she had known him. 3 years ago. He took a 20-year sentence to keep his mouth shut and keep this club intact. He never gave up a single name. Wren felt the floor shifting beneath her. Every assumption she had ever made about her life was rearranging itself. She was not the accidental daughter of a woman who could not stay. She was the hidden daughter of a man who chose a cage so that other men could stay free. "Why did you not tell me?" Wren whispered. "Because you were scared and starving and you needed to earn your place without riding on a dead man's name," Hatchet said. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. He looked at her the way a man looks at something precious that he has been entrusted to protect. "You are not just some straw we took in Calloway. You are club legacy. This garage, these men out there, we are not just your employers." Hatchet reached out and tapped his knuckles against her chest gently right over her heart. "You are family, and nobody touches our family." The following Saturday, the Ironclad Charter held its monthly gathering. They called it church. The meeting itself happened behind a reinforced steel door in the back of the building, and only patch members were allowed inside. But afterward, the parking lot transformed. Industrial smokers were wheeled out. Cases of beer appeared. A whole pig was set over coals in a pit that looked like it had been dug sometime during the previous century. Bikers from neighboring charters rolled in throughout the afternoon, their Harleys shaking the Oakland pavement in waves of chrome and thunder. Wren stood near the smokers, a bottle of cheap beer in her hand, watching the sea of leather and denim. She was not one of them, she knew that. But she was no longer outside the fence. Overwhelming is it not? Wren turned. Standing next to her was a man she had not met before. He was older than Hatchet, maybe early 60s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of desert sandstone by decades of wind and sun. Deep wrinkles mapped the terrain around his eyes. Faded scars crossed his forehead and jaw. He wore a president patch over his left breast and a nomad rocker on the back of his cut. His eyes were a startling, piercing gray, and they held the quiet authority of a man who had been in charge of dangerous people for a very long time. "I am Deacon," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Ren," she replied, shaking it firmly. Deacon smiled. It was a slow expression, the kind that built itself one layer at a time. "I know who you are, sweetheart. You have got Wraith's jawline. Stubborn as all hell. Your daddy and I rode together back in the 90s before everything went sideways for him." Ren gripped her bottle tighter. "Hatchet told me he died in federal prison, but nobody will tell me what he actually did. Nobody will tell me who he really was." Deacon looked out over the crowd. The firelight from the pig pit cast moving shadows across his weathered face. His expression darkened, settling into something that was part sorrow and part reverence. "Wraith was a good brother," Deacon said, "but he got greedy. He started running things off the books without the club's blessing. When the ATF caught wind, they squeezed him, offered him a deal, turn informant, give up the charter, walk free." Deacon paused. He took a long pull from his beer. Wraith refused. He took the full 20-year bid. He kept his mouth shut. He protected every man in this parking lot with his silence. "That is why you are protected here, Ren. Your father paid for your safety with his life." Ren looked at the bikers around her, the men laughing over plates of barbecue, the men arguing about engine specifications, the men who had given her a job when no one else would, who had put a roof over her head, who had surrounded a man twice her size and told him that touching her meant war. These men were free because her father had chosen a cell. Deacon Ren said, her voice barely audible over the rumble of conversation and the crackle of the fire. "Did he leave anything behind? Anything besides me?" Deacon looked at her. His gray eyes held something she could not quite read. A hesitation, a calculation, the careful weighing of how much truth a 19-year-old girl could carry without it crushing her. Then he looked away, out toward the line of Harleys gleaming under the string lights, and he said nothing. But his silence lasted one beat too long. And Ren Calloway had spent her entire life listening to the things people did not say. Something was out there, something her father had left behind. Something that mattered enough to make a man like Deacon choose his words the way a man chooses his steps in a minefield. And Ren knew with the cold certainty that had kept her alive through 17 nights in a dead car, that whatever it was coming for her whether she was ready or not. The storm came wearing a suit. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Deacon's silence at the pig roast. The Oakland rain had returned steady and gray, washing grease and grime into the gutters and turning the streets into dark mirrors. Ren was alone in the front bay changing the brake pads on a customer's Road King. The work was routine. Caliper off, old pads out, new pads in, compress the piston, reassemble. She could do it in her sleep now. Her hands had learned the language of the garage so completely that they moved without her conscious direction, leaving her mind free to wander into the places she had been trying to avoid. She had been thinking about Deacon's silence every day for 3 weeks. The way his gray eyes had flickered when she asked if Wraith had left anything behind. The way he had turned away without answering. The pause that lasted one beat too long. Something was out there. Something with weight. And the weight of it was pressing against the walls of her new life like water behind a dam. The sound of tires on wet pavement pulled her back. A dark sedan rolled up to the open bay doors blocking the exit. It was not the kind of car that belonged on this street. It was too clean, too deliberate, too government. 2 men stepped out. They wore cheap suits and cheaper shoes. They moved with the practiced authority of men who believed that the badge in their pocket made them untouchable. They did not have the rough, chaotic energy of the bikers. They smelled like peppermint gum and stale coffee, and the particular kind of arrogance that comes from spending too many years inside institutions that never question their own power. Ren slid out from beside the bike. Her hand found the heavy lug wrench on the workbench beside her. She did not pick it up. She just placed her fingers on it. "Shop is closed," she said. The taller one smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a man uses when he wants you to know that he already knows the answer to the question he is about to ask. "We are not here for an oil change," he said. He reached into his jacket and produced a gold badge. "Agent Pruitt, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. You are Wren Calloway, Jolene Albright's daughter." Wren's blood went cold. It started in her hands and spread upward through her arms and into her chest, a slow freeze that turned her muscles rigid. "I do not know who you are talking about," she said. Pruitt chuckled. He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms, settling in with the casual confidence of a man who had done this 100 times. "Sure you do not. Listen, kid. We know your father was Rafe Calloway. We know he left a safety deposit box before he got locked up. Inside it is a ledger, a book full of names, dates, and dollar amounts that documents every payoff, every dirty cop, every crooked judge, and every city official who was on the Hells Angels payroll throughout the late 90s and early 2000s. Your mother was supposed to hand it over to us 10 years ago as part of a deal we offered her. Instead, she ran. Now she is gone, and you are living in the garage of the very organization that put your father in a pine box." Wren said nothing. She kept her hand on the wrench. She kept her eyes on Pruitt. She did not blink. Pruitt pushed off the doorframe and walked closer. His partner stayed by the car, scanning the hallways and the back entrances with the nervous alertness of a man who understood exactly where he was standing. "They are using you," Wren Pruitt said. His voice dropped, taking on the false warmth of a man who has rehearsed compassion until it almost sounds real. "They do not care about you. They are keeping you close because they think your mother sent you here with the ledger. If they find it before we do, they will bury it, and they will probably bury you right alongside it." The words landed in Wren's stomach like stones dropped into cold water. She wanted to reject them. She wanted to feel nothing. But the truth was that Pruitt's words fit into the empty spaces that Deacon's silence had left behind. "Get off the property." The voice came from the shadows of the hallway like a cannon firing in a cathedral. Hatchet stepped into the light. Behind him, Ox and two other patched members materialized from the back of the shop. They were not holding weapons. They did not need to. Their bodies were weapons. Their presence was a statement that required no translation. Pruitt held up his hands in mock surrender. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man playing a long game who had just made the move he intended to make all along. "Just having a friendly chat, Hatchet. Catching up with the youth." "You do not talk to her," Hatchet snarled, stepping between Wren and the agents. "You want to talk, you talk to our lawyers. Now get off my lot before I have Ox put your sedan through the compactor." Pruitt reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He did not hand it to Wren. He tossed it at her feet. The small white rectangle landed on the grease-stained concrete between them. "Think about what I said, kid. When you find it, call me before they figure out you are useless to them." The agents left. The tires of their sedan squealed on the wet pavement, leaving black marks on the asphalt like a signature. Wren stared at the business card on the floor. She did not pick it up, but she did not look away either. Hatchet turned to her. His blue eyes were hard, but there was something underneath the hardness, something that looked like fear. "Do not listen to a word that Fed says," Hatchet told her. She nodded, but she had already noticed something that sent a cold wire threading through her gut. When Hatchet spoke, he did not look her in the eye. For the first time since she had known him, the man who stared down every threat with unblinking certainty could not hold her gaze. And Wren Calloway, who had spent 19 years learning to read the silences of people who could not tell her the truth, heard the things he was not saying louder than the things he was. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Wren's life, and she had lived a life that set a high bar for hardness. On the surface, nothing changed. She woke at 5:15. She showered. She descended to the shop floor and worked until her hands ached and her back screamed. She ate lunch with Ox. She traded insults with Boone. She organized parts and cleaned tools and did everything she was supposed to do with the mechanical precision of a woman holding herself together through routine. But underneath the surface, Pruitt's words were eating through her like acid. "They are keeping you close because they think you have the ledger." She began watching. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone would notice, but she began paying attention to things she had previously ignored. The way certain conversations stopped when she entered a room. The way Hatchet's eyes followed her across the shop floor. The way a patch member named Slade had started appearing in places he did not usually appear. Slade was a man in his late 30s with a shaved head and a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset more than once. He had been with the ironclad charter for years. He was quiet, efficient, and carried himself with the cold competence of a man who did not need to prove anything to anyone. Wren had barely spoken to him in her weeks at the garage. He existed on the periphery of her world, a shadow among shadows. But now Slade was asking questions. They came wrapped in casual conversation delivered with the easy indifference of a man making small talk. He asked Wren about her car, about where she had lived before the garage, about whether Jolene had left any belongings behind, about whether she had gone through the Taurus before abandoning it in the lot. Each question taken alone meant nothing. But Wren had grown up in a house where the wrong question asked in the wrong tone at the wrong time meant that Jolene's latest boyfriend was looking for something to pawn. She had developed an ear for the sound of searching disguised as interest. And Slade was searching. She cross-referenced the timeline in her head. Pruitt had come to the garage 3 weeks ago. Slade had started asking questions 2 weeks ago. The sequence was wrong. If Slade were simply curious, his questions would have started after Pruitt's visit, prompted by the same concerns everyone else had. But Slade's first question about Wren's car had come the day before Pruitt appeared. One day before, Slade had known the ATF was coming before they arrived. The realization hit Wren at 2 in the morning while she lay in her apartment above the garage staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She ran through it again. Slade's timeline, Pruitt's visit, the sequence, the questions. Slade was connected to Pruitt. Slade was looking for the ledger. And Slade had started looking before the ATF showed their hand. Wren did not panic. She had spent too many years surviving to waste energy on panic. Panic was for people who had the luxury of safety. Instead, she did what she had always done when the ground shifted beneath her feet. She made a plan. The next evening, long after the front bays were locked and the back lot was empty, Wren walked to the corner of the shop where Slade was cleaning a set of cylinder heads. She kept her voice light, conversational. "I am going to head down to my old car tonight," she said, not looking at him, keeping her eyes on the parts she was shelving. "I have been meaning to grab the last of my mom's stuff, some photos and things she left in the glove box. Probably should do it before someone strips the car for scrap." Slade did not look up from his work. His hands kept moving, steady and precise. But the rhythm of his cleaning changed. It got faster, almost imperceptibly. But Wren noticed because Wren noticed everything. "Makes sense," Slade said. "No point letting that stuff rot out there." Wren nodded and walked away. She climbed the stairs to her apartment. She sat on the edge of her bed and waited. At 11:45 that night, Wren slipped out of the garage through the ventilation shaft in the back alley, the one with the loose panel that she had discovered during her first week. She moved through the Oakland streets like a shadow, keeping to the alleys, avoiding the streetlights, navigating by memory. But she did not go to the car. Not yet. She circled the block and positioned herself behind a dumpster on the south side of the abandoned lot where the Taurus sat on its flat tires. She crouched in the dark, pulling her hood low over her face, and she waited. At 12:20, she heard them. The crunch of heavy boots on gravel. Two sets of footsteps moving with the deliberate pace of men who did not want to be heard but were too large to be silent. Slade emerged from the shadows first. Behind him came Boone, the young prospect, his face pale and uncertain in the weak light from a distant street lamp. They went straight to the Taurus. Slade tried the driver door. It was locked. He pulled a slim tool from his pocket and worked the lock open in 4 seconds. Professional. Practiced. He climbed into the driver's seat and began searching. Glove box, under the seats, the console. Boone stood outside, shifting his weight from foot to foot, so looking in every direction like a man who knew he was doing something wrong, but could not figure out how to stop. Slade backed out of the car, his jaw tight. He kicked the flat tire. "It is not in here," Slade muttered. "Maybe she already grabbed it," Boone said. "Then we need to find it before Hatchet does." Boone hesitated. His voice dropped lower, but in the absolute silence of the abandoned lot, Wren heard every word. "What happens if she has it? If the kid already found whatever it is?" "Then we handle it," Slade said. "Hatchet protects the club first. You know the rules. Legacy or not, nobody is bigger than the patch." The words cut through the night air and into Wren's chest like a blade made of ice. She pressed her hand over her mouth to silence her breathing. Her eyes burned, but she did not cry. Crying was a luxury. Crying was what you did after. Right now, she was in the middle, and in the middle, you stayed still, and you stayed silent, and you gathered every piece of information the darkness was willing to give you. After 10 minutes, Slade and Boone left. Their boots crunched away into the Oakland night, and the silence returned. Wren stayed behind the dumpster for another 20 minutes. She was not being cautious. She was thinking, running every possibility through her mind the way she ran diagnostics on a misfiring engine, eliminating, testing, isolating the fault. Then she moved. She crossed the lot and opened the Taurus. The smell hit her first, vanilla and despair. Her mother's scent baked so deep into the cheap upholstery that 17 days of rain and cold and abandonment had not been able to wash it away. Wren climbed inside and went to work. She did not waste time on the obvious places. Slade had already checked those. She went straight to the fuse box under the steering column. The memory surfaced with perfect clarity. She was 16. The car's electrical system had shorted out. Jolene had gone completely hysterical, screaming at Wren not to touch the fuse box, insisting on paying a shady backyard mechanic 3 times the going rate to fix it, while she stood over him the entire time watching his hands. At the time, Wren had thought it was just another of her mother's irrational outbursts. Jolene was a woman who lived on the knife edge of emotion, swinging between manic tenderness and blind rage with no warning. An overreaction to a blown fuse was barely a footnote. But now Wren understood. She grabbed the flathead screwdriver from her back pocket and wedged it into the seam of the fuse box casing. She levered it. The plastic resisted, then gave way with a loud crack that echoed through the dead car like a gunshot. Behind the standard rows of colored fuses taped securely to the inner wall of the dashboard cavity, with electrical tape that had yellowed with age, was a thick waterproof pouch. Black nylon, heavy, sealed with a zipper that had been waxed to keep moisture out. Wren's hands were trembling. She pulled the pouch free. She unzipped it. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked and darkened with age. Beside it, a small cluster of tarnished safety deposit box keys held together with a twist of wire. Wren opened the notebook. The pages were filled with handwriting she had never seen. Small, cramped, precise letters that pressed hard into the paper as if the man writing them was afraid the words might try to escape. Dates, names, dollar amounts, routes. The ledger was not just a record of gun-running operations. It was a comprehensive map of corruption. Dirty cops, bought judges, city officials who had taken money from the Hells Angels throughout the late 90s and early 2000s in exchange for looking the other way. It documented payoffs and protection schemes and evidence laundering with the meticulous detail of a man who understood that information was the most powerful weapon in the world. It was a nuclear bomb written in ballpoint pen. Wren flipped to the back of the notebook. Tucked between the last page and the inside of the rear cover was a folded piece of loose leaf paper. The handwriting on this page was different. It was erratic, slanted, written in a hurry by a hand that was shaking. She knew this handwriting. She had grown up seeing it on grocery lists and rent checks and the occasional birthday card that Jolene would buy 3 days late and sign with a flourish of guilt. Wren unfolded the letter and read, "Wren, if you are reading this, I am either dead or I have run out of places to run. Your father told me to use this book to buy our safety from the feds. But the club would hunt us to the ends of the earth if I did. I could not give it to Hatchet because I knew he would never forgive me for keeping it a secret this long. So I hid it. And I ran. I ran to keep the target on me instead of on you. Do not trust the law. They will use you and throw you away. Do not trust the patch. They will protect the club before they protect you. Trust yourself. You are the only one who has never let you down. Run." Wren read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words rearranged something inside her. The first reading hit like a slap. The second reading hit like a wave. The third reading hit like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for 19 years. Jolene had not abandoned her out of cruelty. She had not left because she was tired of being a mother. She had left because she was carrying a bomb in the fuse box of a car that her daughter drove, and she had spent years trying to figure out what to do with it, and when the pressure became unbearable, she did the only thing her terrified, chaotic, love-damaged mind could think of. She ran, and she left the bomb behind, praying that Wren would never look underneath the dashboard. Wren folded the letter. She placed it back in the pouch with the ledger and the keys. She zipped it shut and pressed it against her chest. Then she climbed out of the Taurus, closed the door, and walked back through the rain toward the garage. She did not run. She was done running. Whatever was coming, she was going to face it standing up. What she did instead was try to leave on her own terms. At 3 in the morning, the garage was dark and still. The only light came from the red exit signs and the weak glow of the emergency lighting strips along the baseboards. The air was thick with the smell of solvents and ozone, heavier at night, when the ventilation fans were off, settling into the concrete like a chemical fog. Wren crept down the metal staircase from her apartment carrying a dark canvas duffel bag stuffed with everything she owned. 3 pairs of jeans, a handful of shirts, her heavy work boots, $300 in cash, and her entire savings from weeks of off-the-books wages. It was not enough to disappear, but it was enough to get out of California. The ledger was zipped into the inner pocket of her jacket, pressed flat against her ribs. Her eyes settled on the midnight blue Sportster 883 parked near the rear exit. It was the bike Boone had used to teach her clutch control in the back alley. She knew where the keys were kept. Magnetic lockbox on the wall by the fire extinguisher. 3 turns of the dial. Click. She grabbed the keys and rolled the Sportster toward the heavy rear door. The rubber tires whispered against the concrete. Her breath was shallow. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She reached for the iron latch. A hand the size of a sledgehammer clamped down on her shoulder. Wren gasped and spun. Her duffel hit the floor. Her hand shot toward the heavy crescent wrench sitting on the nearest workbench, but another hand caught her wrist in midair and pinned it to her side with the effortless precision of a man restraining a child. Ox materialized from the darkness. His massive silhouette blocked the emergency light behind him, turning him into a mountain-shaped shadow. He was wearing his leather cut over a black thermal. The winged death head on his back seemed to glow in the dim red light. "Going somewhere, kid." His voice was so low it was almost subliminal, a frequency felt in the chest more than heard in the ears. "Let me go, Ox," Wren hissed, struggling against his grip. It was pointless. Fighting Ox was like fighting geology. "I am leaving. You can tell Hatchet I ran. Tell him you did not see me." Ox did not move. He looked down at her with those dark eyes half hidden behind the wild thicket of his beard. His expression was unreadable, but his grip on her wrist loosened just enough to tell her he was not trying to hurt her. "You are stealing club property, Wren. That is a bad decision for a smart girl." "I do not care about the club," Wren shot back. The tears came then not from sadness, but from the sheer pressure of adrenaline and betrayal and exhaustion pressing against the inside of her skull. "I heard Slade and Boone tonight at my car. I know what they are looking for. I know Hatchet is just keeping me around until he finds my father's ledger so he can hand it to the ATF and save his own skin." Ox's grip loosened further. His brow furrowed. The giant man was processing what she had said, turning it over in his mind the way he turned a bolt slowly and with great care. "You heard Slade say that?" "Yes. He told Boone that Hatchet protects the club first, that I am just a loose end. That legacy does not matter when the patch is on the line." Ox was silent for a long moment. Then he released her wrist entirely. He took a step back. He rubbed his face with both hands, and in that gesture the fearsome master mechanic disappeared and was replaced by a tired man who suddenly looked every one of his 50-odd years. "You are half right," Kid Ox said. His voice was heavy. "Slade is looking for the ledger, but he is not doing it for Hatchet. He is doing it to save his own neck." Wren froze. "Agent Pruitt has been squeezing Slade for 6 months on a separate RICO charge," Ox continued. "Slade is looking at 20 years in a federal cell. He has been trying to broker a deal, the ledger in exchange for full immunity. If Slade gets his hands on that book, he does not just save himself. He burns the entire Oakland charter to the ground, and he will put a bullet in anyone who can connect him to the deal, including you." Wren felt the ground tilt. The betrayal she had been so certain about was not the betrayal she thought. But Slade said Hatchet. Slade was feeding Boone poison. Ox said, testing the kid's loyalty, seeing if the young blood would follow a patched brother over the club president. If Boone came to Hatchet and repeated what Slade said, Slade would know his cover was blown. If Boone stayed quiet, Slade would know he had an ally. Wren felt sick. Why did Hatchet not just tell me? Why did he not explain? "Because Hatchet is a hard, stubborn man who thinks he can handle everything in-house," Ox grumbled. He looked at the Sportster, then back at Wren. He does not know Slade is flipped. He told us to keep an eye on you because he knew Pruitt was circling and he was terrified the feds would grab you off the street and use you as leverage. Hatchet never wanted the ledger. He wanted it to stay buried. He wanted you safe. Wren stood in the dark garage, the stolen keys in one hand, and the weight of her father's ledger pressed against her ribs. Every path in front of her was dangerous. Running meant she became a fugitive, hunted by the club, hunted by Pruitt, hunted by Slade. Staying meant she had to trust men who wore their secrets like armor. So what do I do? Wren whispered. Ox picked up her dropped duffel bag and set it on a workbench. Then he pointed his massive, calloused finger toward the steel door that led to the clubhouse and Hatchet's office. You go in there, Ox said. You put that book on his desk. And you tell him exactly what his patch brother has been saying behind his back. We handle this right now, as a family. The hallway to Hatchet's office felt like it stretched for miles. Wren walked slightly behind Ox, letting the giant man fill the corridor ahead of her like a human shield. Her legs felt detached from her body. Her hands were steady, but only because she had locked her fingers around the zipper of her jacket so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Light spilled from beneath Hatchet's door, a sharp yellow line cutting across the dark linoleum. He was still awake at 3 in the morning. Wren wondered if he ever slept, or if he just sat in that cluttered room, surrounded by invoices and ghosts running the machine that Wraith Calloway's silence had kept alive. Ox did not knock. He pushed the door open. Hatchet was behind his scarred wooden desk. A half-empty bottle of bourbon sat next to a disassembled Glock 19, the parts spread out in a neat row on a stained shop rag. He was cleaning the barrel with a thin wire brush, his movements mechanical and precise. When the door opened, his blue eyes snapped up and locked onto Wren, then shifted to Ox. The muscle in his jaw flexed. It is 3 in the morning, Ox. Why is the kid out of bed? And why does she look like she is about to bolt? Because she was, Ox said. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind them. I caught her trying to take the blue Sportster. Hatchet stood up slowly. His hands settled flat on the desk, pressing into the wood. His eyes did not leave Wren. Is that true, Calloway? Wren did not shrink. She did not step behind Ox. She walked past the giant man and straight up to the desk. She unzipped her jacket, reached inside, and pulled out the black waterproof pouch. She placed it on the desk. She opened it, removed the leather-bound notebook, and set it down on the scarred wood directly beside the disassembled pistol. That is 20 years of your dirty laundry, Wren said. Her voice shook, but her chin was up and her eyes were locked on his. Every payoff, every dirty cop, every judge on the payroll. The exact thing my father died protecting. And the exact thing Agent Pruitt is trying to use to bury this charter. Hatchet stared at this notebook. The color drained from his face so slowly it was like watching a tide go out. He reached toward it with the careful reverence of a man reaching towards something sacred and something deadly in equal measure. His thick fingers opened the cover. He saw the handwriting, Wraith's handwriting, the small, cramped, precise letters pressing hard into the page. Where did you get this? Hatchet breathed. My mother hid it at the fuse box of the Taurus. She has been driving around with a bomb under the dashboard for years. Wren paused. She steadied her breath. But that does not matter right now. What matters is that Slade and Boone were at my car 2 hours ago looking for it. Slade is working with Pruitt. He is trying to trade the ledger for immunity on a RICO charge. He has been feeding Boone lies about you to turn him into an ally. Hatchet's head snapped up. The exhaustion in his face was gone, replaced by something ancient and volcanic. A rage so deep it seemed to come from a place below language, below thought, from the bedrock, where the most fundamental laws of his world were written. Slade, Hatchet whispered. The name came out of his mouth like a curse. He is a rat boss, Ox confirmed from the doorway. His arms were crossed over his chest. His voice was flat and final. The kid heard him talking. Slade told Boone you were planning to use Wren to find the book and then cut her loose. He is turning the young blood against you. The silence that followed was the heaviest silence Wren had ever experienced. It was the silence of a man processing the ultimate betrayal. In the world she now inhabited, there was no crime worse than turning rat. It was not just a violation of the code. It was an erasure of identity. A man who turned informant ceased to exist in the eyes of his brothers. Hatchet looked down at the ledger. Then he looked up at Wren. You could have taken this to Pruitt, he said. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. You could have traded it for a new identity, witness protection, a clean start, a life where you never have to smell like gasoline again. Why did you not? The question hung in the air between them. Wren thought about the cold nights in the Taurus, the $3, the stale hot dog shared with a stray cat. She thought about Jolene's letter. Trust yourself. Run. Then she thought about the burrito Ox had brought her on a rainy Tuesday morning, the weight of his hand on her head when Taggart had been thrown out of the garage, the brass key Hatchet had placed on the counter without explanation, the wool blanket left on her back seat in the middle of the night by someone who never asked for credit. Because Pruitt is not my family, Wren said. You are. Hatchet looked at her for a long time. His blue eyes were bright, not with tears. Hatchet was not a man who cried, but with something that burned hotter than tears and lasted longer. Then he did something Wren had never seen him do. He reached across the desk and picked up the photograph that had been lying face down for 12 years. He turned it over and looked at it. The little girl with the pigtails and the gap-toothed smile sitting on a motorcycle too big for her with a younger man behind her who still knew how to be soft. Hatchet held the photograph for a moment. Then he set it down face up on the desk beside the ledger. Her name was Ruthie, Hatchet said. His voice was stripped down to its foundations, bare concrete with nothing built on top. She was 7 years old. I was driving. I should not have been driving. It was late and I was tired, and I told myself it was only 3 more miles. 3 miles. I fell asleep for 2 seconds. 2 seconds and I woke up in a ditch with a shattered windshield and my daughter in the back seat who would never wake up again. Wren could not move. She could not breathe. The room had contracted around the two of them, and the photograph, and the ledger, and the weight of all the things that cannot be undone. 12 years, Hatchet continued. 12 years I have been trying to pay for those 2 seconds. Every day I wake up owing a debt I can never settle. And then you walked into this shop with your mother's eyes and your father's stubborn jaw and $3 to your name, and I swore on Ruthie's name that I would not lose another one. Not you, not ever. He looked at Wren. His eyes were clear and steady and absolutely certain. I did not keep you for the ledger Calloway. I kept you because you were the second chance I do not deserve. And you just proved you deserve a hell of a lot better than anything I can give you. Hatchet picked up the ledger. He held it out to Wren. She took it confused. Wraith left that for your mother to buy her safety, Hatchet said. It belongs to you. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a heavy chrome Zippo lighter. He tossed it to Wren. She caught it with one hand. The feds are going to come for this building the second Slade realizes the book is gone. I am going to deal with the rat in my house. But I cannot protect you in that book at the same time. As long as it exists, Pruitt will never stop hunting you. The ATF will never stop tearing your life apart. Wren looked down at the notebook in her hands. The cracked leather cover. The yellowed pages filled with her father's handwriting. It was the only tangible proof that Wraith Calloway had existed. The only thing he had left behind besides a daughter he never met and a 20-year silence that had kept these men free. Destroying this means the feds have nothing on the club, Wren said. It means we are safe, Hatchet corrected. He slid the magazine into the reassembled Glock and racked the slide. The metallic clack echoed in the small room like a period at the end of a sentence. He holstered the weapon and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. You burned that book, Calloway, and there is no going back to the civilian world. You erase the only leverage you have. You do this, and you are tied to ironclad customs to me, to Ox, and to the patch for the rest of your natural life. Are you ready to be a ghost kid? Wren looked at the Zippo in her hand. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the photograph of Ruthie, 7 years old and smiling in the California sun, on a motorcycle she would never get to ride. She flipped the lid of the Zippo. The sharp sneck echoed in the small office. She struck the flint. A small yellow flame appeared steady and clean, illuminating the dark corners of the room and casting long shadows across the scarred desk and the face of the man who had been waiting 12 years for someone to save. Wren held the flame beneath the leather cover of her father's legacy. The edge curled, blackened, caught. The smell of burning paper and old leather filled the air, thick and acrid and final. I was already a ghost, Wren said, watching the fire take hold. Now I am just home. The last page turned to ash in the metal trash can. The office smelled like burned leather and finality. Hatchet stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the flickering neon glow of the ironclad custom sign outside. He was not watching the fire. He was watching the street. His body was coiled with the particular tension of a man preparing for violence, not the explosive kind that comes and goes in seconds, but the slow surgical kind that requires absolute control. Ox has the inner circle in the back, Hatchet said, without turning around. His voice carried no emotion. It was a voice that had already moved past feeling and into function. Slade thinks he is coming in for a standard briefing on the toy run logistics. Boone is with him. Hatchet paused. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered, casting red and white pulses across his weathered face. Boone is young, Hatchet continued. He is impressionable. He listened to a rat because the rat wore a patch and the kid was afraid of making the wrong move. If he chose Slade over this club tonight, I cannot save him. Do you understand what I am telling you? Wren understood. She understood more than she wanted to. In the world she had entered, loyalty was not a feeling. It was an action, and the failure to act was judged just as severely as the act itself. Boone is not a rat, Wren said. Her voice cracked, but she did not look away from the dying embers. He was manipulated. He did not know. Hatchet turned from the window. His eyes were hard. The blue had gone dark, the color of deep water, where the light does not reach. In this life, Calloway listening to treason without reporting it is the same as committing it. He walked to the door. His hand rested on the handle. Stay here. If you hear gunshots, you go out the window, take the Sportster, and you do not stop until you hit the Nevada state line. Do you hear me? Wren nodded. Her throat was too tight to speak. Hatchet opened the door. The hallway beyond was dark except for a thin strip of light coming from beneath the churchroom door at the far end. He stepped through and pulled the door shut behind him. The heavy thud of his boots faded down the corridor, each step measured and deliberate, the footsteps of a man walking towards something he had done before and hoped he would never have to do again. Wren sat in the dark office. The embers in the trash can glowed like small red eyes staring up from the bottom of a well. She counted her heartbeats. She counted to 60. Then she counted to 60 again. The garage was silent, the kind of silence that has weight and texture that presses against the eardrums and fills the spaces between thoughts with dread. Then the silence broke. It was not gunfire, it was voices. A sudden eruption of shouting muffled by the reinforced walls of the church room, but violent enough to vibrate through the floor. Then came the sound of a heavy body hitting something solid. Wood. A table. The impact was followed by a grunt and more shouting and the sharp crack of bone meeting bone. Wren could not stay in the chair. Her body would not allow it. The same instinct that had driven her to crawl under broken cars and fix engines in the dark. The instinct that said, move toward the problem, not away from it, pulled her out of the office and into the corridor. She crept down the hallway with her back against the cold cinder block wall. The light beneath the church room door was brighter now. Someone had turned on the overhead fluorescence. The shouting had stopped, replaced by something worse. A single voice speaking at a volume that was almost conversational, but carried the density of a scream compressed into a whisper. The door was cracked open. Not much, 3 inches, enough to see. Slade was pinned against the heavy mahogany meeting table that dominated the center of the room. Ox had one massive hand wrapped around his throat, pressing him down against the polished wood with the dispassionate efficiency of a man pinning a specimen to a board. Slade's face was turning purple. His hands clawed at Ox's forearm, but he might as well have been trying to bend rebar. 2 other patch members stood guard at the door. Wren recognized them. Miller and Kelso, old guard, men who had been with the charter since before Wraith's arrest. Their faces showed nothing. They were witnesses. Their job was to watch and to remember. Boone was in the corner. He sat in a wooden chair with his hands on his knees and his face the color of wet cement. His eyes were wide. His lower lip was trembling. He looked like a young man who had just realized that the world he had been trying so hard to enter had teeth, and those teeth were now very close to his skin. Hatchet stood over Slade. He held the empty black waterproof pouch in one hand, the one Wren had found in the fuse box. He held it up so Slade could see it. Looking for this Slade, his voice was terrifyingly calm. The calm of deep water, the calm of a man who has moved past anger into the cold mechanical territory of judgment. Slade gasped for air, his eyes bulging. Ox eased the pressure on his throat just enough to let words through. Hatchet, I can explain. The feds. They had me cornered. They were going to put me away for life. I did not have a choice. We all take that risk when we put on the cut, Hatchet said. The calm shattered. He slammed his fist into the table 6 inches from Slade's head. The sound was like a gunshot. The table shuddered. A coffee mug that had been sitting near the edge toppled and shattered on the concrete floor. You were going to sell out a dead brother's daughter. You were going to hand over Wraith's legacy to a federal agent just so you could sleep in a bed instead of a cell. You would have let Pruitt use that girl as a pawn, and when she was no longer useful, you would have let her disappear. A 19-year-old girl who came to us with nothing, who trusted us, who trusted you. I did it for the club, Slade wheezed. The words came out broken, squeezed through a throat that was being held by a hand that could crush cinder blocks. That book was a liability. If the feds got it on their own terms, we were finished. I was going to intercept it. Control the handoff, negotiate. Liar Hatchet spat. He straightened up and looked across the room at Boone. The young prospect flinched under his gaze as if he had been struck. And you heard a patched brother talking about betraying a dead man's daughter, about undermining your president. And you said nothing. You came to nobody. You followed him to that parking lot and helped him search her car. Why? Boone opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. When the words finally came, they were barely audible, pushed through a throat constricted by shame. I did not think he was serious, Hatchet. He is a patched brother. I am just a prospect. I thought I was misunderstanding this situation. I thought maybe you had authorized it, and I just did not know the full picture. I did not know what to do. Hatchet stared at him for a long time. The disappointment in his eyes was worse than anger. It was the look of a man watching potential collapse into failure. He turned back to Slade and nodded at Ox. Ox released his grip. Slade slumped against the table, coughing violently, his hands going to his throat. Strip him, Hatchet said. Miller and Kelso stepped forward. They moved with clinical precision, the choreography of men who had performed this ritual before. They grabbed the leather vest from Slade's shoulders and pulled it off his back. The denim tore at the seams. They ripped the ironclad rocker from the back panel. They tore the Hells Angels patches from the front. Each patch came away with a sound like skin being peeled, a wet, fibrous ripping that filled the room with a finality that no words could match. In the biker world, this was not punishment. This was death. Not of the body, but of the identity. A man without his patches was a man without a country, without a brotherhood, without the only family that had ever claimed him. You have 1 hour to get out of Oakland, Hatchet said. He looked down at the broken man on the floor with a detached assessment of a surgeon examining a tumor he had just removed. If I see your face in Northern California after sunrise, the feds will not be the ones you need to worry about. You are out. Bad standing, no contact, no communication. You do not exist. Slade scrambled to his feet. He did not look at anyone. He kept his eyes on the floor as he moved toward the door, a man stripped of everything that had given his life structure and meaning. Miller stepped aside to let him pass. Kelso did not. He stood his ground until Slade was forced to squeeze past him, a final wordless humiliation. Then Slade was gone. The door closed behind him. The sound of his footsteps faded down the corridor and out of the building and into the Oakland night, where he would become another ghost on streets already crowded with them. Hatchet turned to Boone. The young man sat rigid in his chair, tears running silently down his pale face. His hands were gripping his knees so hard his knuckles had turned white. He was waiting for the same sentence, the same ritual, the same tearing of patches in identity that he had just witnessed. Then a voice came from the crack in the door, a voice that was not supposed to be there. He was manipulated by a patched brother, Wren said. She pushed the door open and stepped into the church room. Every head turned toward her. Miller's eyes went wide. Kelso shifted his weight. Ox looked at Hatchet with an expression that said, "Your call, boss." Wren walked into the room. She was not a member. She had no patch. She had no standing in this hierarchy. By every rule of this world, she had no right to speak in this room. But she spoke anyway because she had earned something that night that was worth more than a patch. Boone is 23 years old, Wren continued. She looked at Hatchet. Her voice was steady. She did not flinch. He has been in this club for less than a year. Slade has been patched for over a decade. When a full member tells a prospect something, the prospect does not question it. That is the rule. Boone followed the rule. He followed it in the wrong direction because the man giving the orders was a traitor. That is not the same thing as being one. The room was silent. Hatchet looked at Wren, he looked at Boone, he looked at the pile of torn patches on the floor where Slade's identity lay in pieces. Then he looked back at Wren, and in his eyes she saw something she had never seen before. Not just respect, not just recognition, but the quiet, almost reluctant acknowledgement that the girl standing in front of him was no longer a girl at all. Hatchet turned to Boone. "You are back to day one," Hatchet said. His voice was firm, but it had lost its edge. "Prospect status, full restart. You sweep floors, you scrub toilets, you do every dirty job in this shop without complaint. You earn that patch again from scratch, or you follow Slade out that door. Do you understand?" Boone nodded frantically. The relief on his face was so raw and so enormous that it seemed to collapse his entire body. His shoulders dropped, his hands unclenched. He exhaled for what seemed like the first time in an hour. "Yes, Hatchet, yes. I understand, thank you." Hatchet did not acknowledge the gratitude. He turned to Ox. "Clean this up. Church is over." As the men began to file out, Hatchet caught Wren's eye. He did not smile. He did not speak. He tapped his knuckles against his chest twice over his heart. Then he walked past her and into the hallway. Wren stood alone in the church room for a moment, looking at the torn patches on the floor. The winged death head stared up at her from the crumpled leather, its empty eye sockets dark and unblinking. She turned and walked back to her apartment and lay down on her bed and listened to the garage humming beneath her. She did not sleep. But for the first time since she had found the ledger, the silence did not feel like a threat. It felt like a clearing after a storm. The sun bled over the Oakland skyline at 6:47 the next morning, casting long orange shadows across the industrial cranes and shipping containers that lined the waterfront. The light was hard and clean, the kind that comes after a night of rain when the clouds have finally exhausted themselves and moved east toward the mountains. Inside Ironclad Customs, the air still carried the faint, acrid trace of burned leather and paper. Wren sat on a stool at the back workbench, methodically cleaning a set of torque wrenches. The rhythmic motion of the rag against the chrome was meditative. She was not just cleaning tools. She was anchoring herself to the present because the present was the only territory she controlled. At exactly 7 o'clock, the familiar hum of a high-performance engine vibrated through the open bay doors. It was not the rumble of a Harley. It was the whine of a government sedan. Agent Pruitt did not bother parking on the street. He pulled directly into the lot, his tires spraying gravel against the cinder block wall. 4 men in tactical windbreakers climbed out behind him, a TF in bold yellow letters across their backs. They moved with the synchronized confidence of a unit that had done this 100 times before. Pruitt kicked the side door open so hard the handle punched a dent into the drywall behind it. He strode into the garage, holding a folded document above his head like a flag of conquest. "Search warrant," Pruitt announced. His voice echoed off the corrugated steel ceiling and bounced around the concrete bays. "We have probable cause to believe that stolen government property and evidence related to an ongoing criminal conspiracy are being held on these premises, specifically the personal records of one Wraith Calloway." He did not hand the warrant to Hatchet. He slapped it onto the red tool chest nearest the door, right next to a puddle of spilled transmission fluid. The paper soaked up the pink liquid along its bottom edge. Hatchet stood by his office door, holding a ceramic mug of black coffee. The steam curled around his face like smoke from a slow fire. He looked at the warrant with the same interest a man might give a flyer for a pizza restaurant he had never heard of. "You are early, Pruitt, but if you are here for a tour, we run a clean operation. Feel free to admire the engines, just do not touch the chrome with those federal fingers. Hard to get the smudges off." The agents did not laugh. They moved through the garage like locusts. They tore open the meticulously organized parts bins, scattering bolts and gaskets and O-rings across the concrete floor. They ripped open the lockers in the break room, throwing personal effects and spare leather vests into careless heaps. 2 agents went straight for the stairs and disappeared into Wren's apartment. She could hear them above her, the mattress being flipped, the small dresser being emptied, the floorboards being tapped and hammered to check for hollow spaces. They were taking apart the only room she had ever felt safe in, and the violation moved through her body like a low current of electricity, hot and sharp. But she did not look up from her workbench. She kept cleaning the wrenches. She kept her breathing steady. She let the sound of the search wash over her the way the rain washed over the Oakland streets, knowing that it would pass, knowing that the thing they were looking for no longer existed. Pruitt watched his men work for 20 minutes. Then he walked across the shop floor, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete, and stopped directly in front of Wren's workbench. He leaned forward. His face was inches from hers. He smelled like peppermint gum and stale coffee and the particular desperation of a man whose career depends on finding something that has already turned to smoke. "Where is it, Wren?" His voice was low and tight, stripped of the casual arrogance he had worn like a costume during his first visit. "We know you went to the car at 2 in the morning. Our surveillance saw you leave the garage and walk to the lot. We know you accessed the vehicle. We know you took the black pouch from the dashboard cavity. This is your last chance to be a victim in this story. Once I prove you destroyed federal evidence, you are not a scared kid anymore. You are an accomplice. And I will personally make sure you spend the next 5 years in a cell in Dublin." Wren stopped cleaning. She set down the wrench and the rag. She looked up at Pruitt and her eyes were calm. Not defiant, not angry, calm. The kind of calm that comes from having already passed through the worst thing and come out the other side. "I do not know what you are talking about, Agent Pruitt. I went to my car because I could not sleep. I was looking for some old photographs of my mother. It is a piece of junk sitting on flat tires in an empty lot. If there was a pouch in there, someone must have taken it months ago. This is not exactly a secure neighborhood." Pruitt's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed in his temple. He reached toward her shoulder as if he wanted to grab her and shake the truth loose, but his hand stopped in midair. He had caught Hatchett's gaze from across the room. Ox had moved to a position 3 feet behind the agent. His massive arms crossed, his expression blank, impatient, and utterly terrifying. Pruitt pulled his hand back. The search continued for 3 hours. The lead agent returned from Wren's apartment with empty hands and a frustrated expression. "Nothing, sir. We checked the ventilation ducts, the plumbing access panels, and the subflooring. The apartment is clean." Pruitt's face turned the color of a bruise, purple and yellow and dark around the edges. He turned back to Wren, his voice dropping to a hiss that only she could hear. "You are playing a very dangerous game, kid. These men are not your friends. They are a criminal organization, and the second you become a liability instead of an asset, they will throw you away like a used oil filter. Come with me right now, and I can still get you into witness protection. I can give you a name, a school, a life where you do not have to smell like engine grease every single day of your existence." Wren wiped her hands on a rag and stood up from the workbench. She was taller than the last time Pruitt had seen her. Not physically. Something else had changed. Something in the way she held her shoulders, and the way her feet were planted on the concrete, and the way her eyes met his without a single flicker of uncertainty. "I am already protected," Wren said. Her voice carried across the silent garage, reaching every corner and every man in it. She reached up slowly and pushed the sleeve of her left arm past her elbow. On the pale skin of her inner forearm, still fresh, still slightly raised and tender, was a tattoo. It was not the full-winged death head that took years of service and sacrifice to earn. It was smaller, elegant, a set of spectral wings rendered in fine black linework, and in the center, in classic block lettering, a single word: Wraith. It was a legacy mark. In the language of the Hells Angels, it was a declaration that transcended paperwork and legal boundaries and the authority of any federal agency. It meant that the person wearing it was under the permanent protection of the charter. Not an employee, not a guest, not a ward. Family. Blood recognized by iron. Pruitt stared at the ink. The implications of it sank into his face layer by layer, each one stripping away another fragment of his authority. To pursue Wren now was to declare war on every charter in Northern California. Not over evidence, not over a ledger, over a girl. And that was a war the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives was not prepared to fight. "We are done here," Pruitt barked. His voice cracked on the second word, fracturing like ice under sudden weight. "Pack it up, all of you now." He turned to Hatchett and pointed a trembling finger across the garage. "This is not over. We will be watching every bike that leaves this lot. We will be in your taxes, your trash, your rearview mirrors. Every time you breathe, I want you to smell me. Then I will be sure to invest in better air freshener." Hatchet replied. He did not blink. He did not move. He stood perfectly still and watched Agent Pruitt the way a man watches a storm that is already past its peak. The ATF vehicles pulled out of the lot. The tires screeched against the wet pavement in a petulant farewell, leaving black marks on the asphalt like a signature that nobody would read. The silence that followed was enormous. It filled the garage from floor to ceiling, pressing against the walls, expanding into every bay and every corner. Then Ox broke it. He slid out from under the hydraulic lift on his wheeled creeper, his massive frame scraping against the concrete, and he let out a laugh that sounded like a boulder rolling down a mountain. The look on his face when he saw the ink. "I thought that man was going to have a stroke right there on my clean floor." The laughter spread. Boone, who had been standing motionless by the parts cage for the entire search, let out a breath he had been holding for 3 hours. Miller shook his head and went back to his workbench. Kelso muttered something about federal agents and wasted taxpayer money and began sweeping up the bolts and gaskets that had been scattered across the floor. Hatchet walked over to Wren. He did not hug her. That was not the way of this world. But he reached into the pocket of his leather cut and pulled out a small, heavy object. He pressed it into her palm. It was the chrome Zippo, the one she had used to burn the ledger. The soot had been cleaned off. The metal had been polished until it shone like a gold coin. Hatchet had done it himself sometime during the 3 hours of the search, while the ATF tore his building apart and his world held its breath. "You did more than save the club last night," Calloway Hatchet said. His voice was low, quiet in a way that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with weight. "You honored a man who spent 20 years in the dark so we could stay in the light. Wraith would have been proud of the woman you became last night. You are a part of this now, not because of your name, because of your spine." Wren closed her fingers around the Zippo. It was warm from Hatchet's pocket. She felt the warmth spread up through her hand and into her wrist and settle somewhere behind her sternum in the space where the cold had lived for 19 years. The word traveled fast. It moved through the network of Hell's Angels charters the way information has always traveled, through tight-knit organizations, through phone calls made on burner phones, and conversations held in back rooms, and messages carried by men on motorcycles who rode through the night without stopping. By Friday morning, every charter in Northern California knew 3 things. Slade had turned rat, he had been stripped, and the daughter of Wraith Calloway had found the ledger that could have destroyed them all, and she had burned it. Saturday morning broke clear and cold over Oakland. The November sun sat low on the horizon, pale and sharp, cutting through the last remnants of the week's rain clouds like a blade through gauze. Wren stood outside the front bay of Ironclad Customs at 6:30 in the morning, holding a mug of coffee in both hands, watching the empty street. She heard them before she saw them. It started as a low vibration in the pavement. A distant hum felt through the soles of her boots before it reached her ears. Then the hum became a rumble. The rumble became a roar, and the roar grew and grew and grew until it filled the entire frequency spectrum, from the deepest bass that rattled the windows of the garage to the high, sharp crack of exhaust valves firing in rapid succession. They came around the corner of East 14th Street in a formation so tight and so precise that it looked like a single organism made of chrome and leather and thunder. The lead bike was a black Road King with custom ape hangers, and the man riding it was Deacon. His gray hair streamed behind him in the wind. His weathered face was set in an expression of absolute purpose. Behind him, in rows of 4 stretching back down the street so far that Wren could not see the end of the column, were Harleys. Dozens of them, then scores, then hundreds. They filled the street from curb to curb. They turned the pavement into a river of chrome and black paint and polished leather. The sound of their engines was so enormous that it ceased to be noise and became weather, a physical force that pressed against Wren's chest and vibrated in her teeth and shook the coffee in her mug into concentric rings. She stood motionless, watching the column pour into the parking lot and the side streets and the empty lots around the garage. Men climbed off their bikes and stood beside them, their leather cuts bearing the names of charters from across Northern California. Sacramento, San Jose, Fresno, Stockton, Redding, Eureka. 7 charters. Men who had never met Wren. Men who had ridden through the night from cities 200 and 300 miles away. 312 motorcycles. Wren counted them as they arrived because counting was what she did when the world became too large to hold. She counted them the way she counted heartbeats and bolt threads in the seconds between lightning and thunder. 312 machines and 312 men who had come to stand in a parking lot in Oakland at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. Not for the ledger, not for Wraith, not for the memory of a dead man's 20-year silence. For her. Because she had held the most powerful weapon any of them had ever seen, and she had chosen to burn it. Because she had chosen the patch over the payday, the family over the escape hatch, the iron over the easy road. Deacon walked across the lot toward her. His boots crunched on the gravel. His gray eyes were bright in the early morning light. He stopped in front of Wren and looked at her for a long moment, the way a man looks at something he wants to remember exactly as it is. Your daddy was a complicated man, Deacon said. He did some things right and he did some things wrong. But the one thing he did better than anyone I ever knew was keep his mouth shut when it mattered. Looks like it runs in the blood. He extended his hand. Wren shook it. His grip was firm and dry and calloused from decades of gripping handlebars and fighting and holding on to things that mattered. Behind Deacon, 311 men stood beside their bikes in the cold morning air. Some of them nodded at Wren. Some of them simply stood and looked at her with the quiet, steady regard of men who understood what she had done because they had spent their entire lives inside a world where that kind of loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Wren looked at Hatchet. He stood by the bay doors, his arms crossed, his blue eyes moving across the sea of chrome and leather. His face was unreadable, but the muscle in his jaw was working, and Wren realized that the man who had not cried in 12 years was fighting something that looked very much like losing that fight. She looked at Ox, who stood behind Hatchet like a mountain behind a fortress. The giant man caught her eye and raised his coffee mug in a gesture that was half salute and half toast. She looked at Boone, who was standing at the edge of the lot with his hands shoved in the pockets of his jeans. His prospect status reset to 0, his face still carrying the pale residue of shame and relief. When he saw Wren looking at him, he straightened up. He pulled his hands out of his pockets. He nodded once. The morning sun climbed higher. The chrome caught the light and threw it back in 1,000 directions, turning the parking lot into a field of small, sharp stars. Then Hatchet walked across the lot to Wren. His stride was purposeful. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine network of scars on his forearms and the faded lettering of old tattoos that had blurred with time. I need to talk to you, Calloway. Inside. Wren followed him through the bay doors and into the relative quiet of the shop. The hum of 300 engines outside was muffled by the cinder block walls, but still present a deep, low vibration that made the air feel alive. Hatchet stopped beside his workbench. He picked up a shop rag and turned it over in his hands, not cleaning anything, just giving his fingers something to do while his mouth found the words. I got a call this morning, he said, from a brother in the Reno charter. They found her, Wren. Wren's body went still. Every muscle, every nerve, even her breathing stopped suspended in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Found who? Hatchet looked at her. His blue eyes were steady. Jolene, your mother, she is alive. She is in a hospital in Reno. She was found 2 days ago. She had been beaten. Badly. The Reno brothers think it was people connected to the old network people who were looking for the ledger and tracked her down before we could. The words entered Wren's body one at a time, each one landing in a different place. Alive landed in her chest. Hospital landed in her stomach. Beaten landed in her hands, which curled slowly into fists at her sides. Jolene landed everywhere, filling every hollow space that 17 days in a dead car and 19 years of abandonment had carved out of her. Her mother was alive. The woman who had emptied their bank account and vanished. The woman who had written a letter that said run and hidden it behind a fuse box with a dead man's secrets. The woman who smelled like vanilla perfume and who hummed while she cooked and who had spent years carrying a bomb she was too afraid to detonate and too loyal to surrender. She was alive, and she was hurt, and she was alone in a hospital in a city 200 miles away. Wren did not speak for a long time. She stared at the concrete floor, at the familiar patterns of oil stains and boot prints that she had scrubbed so many times she knew them by heart. She felt the vibration of 300 engines outside pressing against the walls. She felt the weight of the Zippo in her pocket and the tenderness of the fresh ink on her forearm. She had come to this garage with $3 and no family. She had found a father's ghost and a mother's lie in a room full of men who called her their own. And now the woman who had started all of it, the woman who had run so that Ren would not have to, was lying in a hospital bed in Reno. And the question was not whether Ren would go to her. The question was who she would be when she got there. "You want to go?" Hatchet said. It was not a question. It was a recognition. Ren looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. Her jaw was set. She was not the same girl who had pushed through the side door of this garage in an oversized gray sweatshirt with $3 and a prayer. She was not the same girl who had sunk to the floor behind the counter and cried when Taggart grabbed her collar. She was not even the same girl who had lit a Zippo in a dark office and burned her father's legacy to ash. She was someone new, someone forged in grease and fire, and the terrible, beautiful weight of choosing who your family is. "Yes," Ren said. "I want to go." Hatchet tossed the shop rag onto the bench. "Then we ride." The rest of the day moved with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a ritual. Ren went upstairs to her apartment. She showered. She changed into clean clothes. She packed a small bag with the essentials. Then she sat on the edge of her bed for 10 minutes looking at the room. The cinder block walls, the thin industrial carpet, the small table with the hot plate where she made instant coffee every morning, the lock on the door that she had tested 7 times on her first night and only once last night. She had arrived in this room with nothing. She was leaving it with something she could not fit in a bag. She was leaving it knowing she could come back. She went downstairs. In the break room, Ox had set up a table. On it were paper plates and foil containers of food that someone had picked up from the barbecue joint down the street. Ribs, cornbread, coleslaw, baked beans. It was not a celebration. It was a meal, a simple, ordinary meal shared by people who belonged to each other. Ren sat down. Ox sat across from her. Boone sat at the end, quiet and watchful. Hatchet leaned against the counter, eating standing up the way he always did. Nobody reached for Ren's plate. Nobody stared at her while she ate. Nobody asked her if she was hungry or told her to eat faster or reminded her that food was a privilege. The ribs sat in front of her and the cornbread sat beside them, and nobody touched any of it until she picked up her fork and took the first bite. It was the smallest thing, the absence of a threat so minor that most people would never have noticed it. But Ren noticed. She noticed because she had spent years eating in rooms where hands reached across tables and plates were pulled away, and food was a weapon used by people who understood that controlling when and what a child eats is the most intimate form of power. Nobody reached for her plate. Nobody watched her eat. The food stayed on the table until she was finished. That evening, Ren walked past Hatchet's office. The door was open. She glanced inside, a reflex born from weeks of cataloging the small details of this place. And she stopped. The photograph of Ruthie was standing upright on the desk, face up. The little girl with the pigtails and the gap-toothed smile sitting on a motorcycle too big for her, grinning at the camera with the fearless joy of a child who does not yet know that the world can hurt her. The frame was no longer turned down. It was standing beside something new. A second photograph propped against the first. It was a picture of Ren taken by Boone on his phone and printed on the shop's ancient inkjet printer. She was standing next to the blue Sportster in the back alley, her hands black with grease, her hair pulled back in a messy knot, a sharp grin on her face. She did not remember smiling when the photo was taken. But there it was, proof that she had smiled, proof that this place had given her a reason to. 2 photographs, side by side, one of a girl who was gone and one of a girl who was here. And in the space between them, the entire weight of a man's grief and his second chance, in the 12 years he had spent trying to earn the right to keep someone safe. Ren looked at the photographs for a long time. Then she walked to her apartment and packed the last of her things. That night, she tested the lock on her door. She turned the deadbolt. She heard it click. She did not test it again. She lay down. She pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders. She listened to the hum of the garage below her feet and the distant, fading rumble of the charters heading home and the small, ordinary sounds of a building settling into itself for the night. She closed her eyes. She slept. In the morning, the convoy formed. Ren came down the stairs at 5:30 to find the lot already alive. Engines were warming. Thermoses were being filled. Men in leather cuts stood in small groups, talking in low voices, their breath forming clouds in the cold November air. The blue Sportster 883 was waiting for her by the front bay. Someone had washed it overnight. The chrome gleamed. The tank had been topped off. A small leather saddlebag had been strapped to the rear fender just large enough for the bag she had packed. Wren strapped her duffel to the bike. She swung her leg over the seat. She settled into the position that Boone had taught her in the back alley weeks ago. Feet on the pegs, hands on the grips, spine straight, eyes forward. Hatchet pulled his bike alongside hers on the left. His Road King rumbled at idle, the deep, steady pulse of a twin-cam engine that had been tuned by Ox's hands. He did not look at her. He looked straight ahead down the street that led to the highway that led to Reno. But his presence beside her was a wall, a promise, a declaration that wherever she was going, she was not going alone. Ox rolled up on her right. His bike was a custom-built road glide painted flat black, the engine so heavily modified that its idle sounded like the breathing of something prehistoric. He glanced down at Wren, his dark eyes crinkled above his beard. "You riding with us, kid? Or are you still working on your clutch control?" Wren kicked the stand up. She turned the ignition. She thumbed the starter. The Sportster roared to life beneath her, a mechanical heartbeat that rose through the frame and into her hands and up through her arms and into her chest, where it merged with her own pulse until she could not tell where the machine ended and she began. "I am riding," Wren said. Behind her, the formation assembled. Boone fell in 3 rows back riding a borrowed Dina that was too big for him, but that he handled with the careful intensity of a young man who understood that he was being given a chance he did not deserve and would not waste. Miller and Kelso rode flank. Deacon took point at the front of the column, his gray hair catching the first light of the sun as it crested the Oakland hills. 312 motorcycles, 1,200 cylinders, 624 exhaust pipes pushing sound into the morning air like a choir of iron and fire. The formation pulled out of the lot and onto the street. The column stretched for half a mile behind Wren, a wall of chrome and thunder that turned every head on every sidewalk and stopped every car at every intersection. The sound was not noise, it was a statement. It was the sound of 300 men telling the world that the girl at the center of the formation was theirs, and that anyone who wanted to reach her would have to come through a half mile of leather and steel, and the kind of loyalty that does not bend and does not break and does not ask permission. Wren leaned into the throttle. The Sportster surged forward. The wind hit her face and pushed the hood of her sweatshirt back and whipped her dark hair behind her. The cold November air rushed into her lungs, and it tasted like gasoline and freedom and the sharp, clean bite of a future that she had built with her own hands. She thought about Jolene, lying in a hospital bed in Reno, alone, hurt, waiting for a daughter she had left behind to protect. A daughter who was coming now, not as a scared girl in a dead car with $3 and a prayer, but as a woman riding at the head of a convoy of 312 motorcycles with a giant on her right and a redeemed man on her left and a legacy mark on her arm, and the ashes of her father's secrets settled permanently into the lines of her palms. She was coming to find her mother, and she was bringing her family with her. The highway opened up ahead of her, long and straight and shimmering in the morning light. Wren Calloway twisted the throttle and felt the engine respond, felt the bike leap forward, felt the formation tighten behind her like a fist closing around something precious. She was no longer an abandoned girl sleeping in a dead car. She was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of a world that had forgotten her. She was no longer the daughter of a man she had never met, defined by an absence she could not fill. She was the thunder.